Hello, everyone. My name is Yvonne Lozano. I am the program chair for the Gerontology program at the College of Health and Human Services. Thank you for taking the time to listen in to this presentation today. The topic is, as you see, the generation gap. What do boomers, millennials, and Xers want from higher education? When I first decided to start to think about what topic I wanted to present in this year's conference, I particularly wanted to focus on the differences in age, but not necessarily age, but the life course perspective of the student that they bring into the classroom, and how this also is not true of students, but also true of faculty. Uh, Understanding and knowing that obviously everyone brings their own life course perspective to the classroom. What does this mean? What does this mean for students? What does this mean for learning? What are the challenges that we come across? And today's presentation is 30 minutes, so this is a general overview of the information as you see today. And please feel free to contact me with any questions that you may have regarding additional content or information from the content that you see here today. What we know about the life course perspective is that there's no sequence to it. It's a sequence of socially defined events and roles that an individual enacts over time. Now, there's in gerontology, we often study and discuss the idea of what we call age appropriate behavior or age grading, if you will, where there are certain events that occur of all of our lives that particularly have a direct impact on transitions, on decisions, on events in our lives. And these events that we experience, whether they're transitions, whether they're planned or unplanned events, have a direct impact on how we grow and evolve as adults. And even as we are adults, we still have these different experiences. For example, we all have planned out for ourselves and children and other people in our lives an age, an idea of an age of when people should graduate from high school or should go to college or should, um, plan to get married or even have children, or when they should be working or retire, etc. But obviously, for some people may not happen in this particular order. But what we do know is that what is discussed in the life course perspective, and what Gene Elder, who is the person who developed this framework of thinking, what he particularly discusses is that it not only does it not occur in a sequence, but it has a direct impact on us as we grow older. Now, let's talk about the life course approach just a little bit more to make sure everybody has an understanding of that. Of course, the approach recognizes that developmental changes um, are based on biological process, and these mold human behavior from birth until death. But also, this approach recognizes that human development is also influenced by a vast array of psychological, social, historical, and economic factors. So it's important to consider uh, the timing, the duration of these events, and the order of life's major events are shaped by demographic changes as well and individual experiences, and of course opportunities that are presented to that individual as well, and within their families, individually. Environment, what surrounds them, the interactions they have with others, and so, of course, in some cases, this we're not from a sociological perspective. This can lead to inequality in some cases, particularly looking at opportunities. Nonetheless, it's an approach that's often used to study our process of evolving and moving forward in human development in life as we move along. Um, the effect of these early life experiences will determine our outcomes as we move along in life and as we grow older in some regards as well. It affects us in making major decisions, such as when to have a child. And think about that for a second. When people decide to have children, or at least we would think they would, people usually consider immediate issues, their finances, their educational plans, where they are living. They're less likely to consider how these decisions will impact their life later on, uh, especially when they make these decisions when they're very young. So these are decisions that can happen for any of us at any particular given time. Now, to continue with the life course perspective, I wanted to make sure that we could kind of see this and kind of summarize it and looking at it. So we look at lifespan development and how this cycle interacts. Now remember, there's no really sequence particularly to understanding this, or that it's important to understand the sequences, but historical time, geographic place, and we'll talk more about historical time because we're going to look at the different generations and the impact of each particular cohort within that generation. So we look at the time of decisions are made. We looked at how lives are linked with individuals within that particular generation. Um, it's particularly the cohort. And the cohort, uh, within the cohort, there's something called a cohort effect. It's the social change that occurs as one cohort replaces another. So let's think of an example here. When one members of an older cohort who hold one set of attitudes die, obviously they're replaced by younger people who hold different attitudes. And so the attitudes of the population of the whole will shift as a result of this cohort replacement. When we are also looking at historical time, we often look at something called aging timetables. And within these transitions, um, events could be leaving home, returning back home, if that was the case, getting married, becoming a parent, um, having children, and somewhere in there, in the sphere of education and work, um, events began sometimes with leaving school and ended with retirement. So that's in a simplified form, I guess, if you will. Um, this whole concept of age norms implies that sometimes if individuals don't really accomplish that transition or accomplish what needs to be accomplished by a certain age, there is can be even social sanctions to some effect, either by family or other colleagues or other individuals in their own particular age group as well. When we look at duration of these life course events, um, we understand that it's a number of years that are spent within each phase of the life course. Um, and it just depends. I mean, for some people are going to spend more time in that particular event for whatever reasons, um, and so there's a lot that can impact that duration that the person stay, that the individual stay within that particular event in their life. Even geographic place, where what part of the country or what part of the world that that person grew up in, or where they were at that particular time, where they got their first job, where they went to college, the culture in which they lived, what was occurring in that environment during that particular time, that geographic location, and not only the time that they made their decisions, and these things. So let's take a look first of all at the traditionalists. Now we're not going to be talking at all or very much regarding this particular generation, but I wanted to bring it up because I think it's important to recognize that we do have some of these age group of students in our classes. I particularly have had a few in my class, more than a few actually, in gerontology, people in their 80s, and I think that also we still have some of our own family members or people we interact with on a regular basis who are in this age group, and that we are able to see some of these same similarities. Now, again, these are not necessarily generalizations, but these are particular characteristics that are identified for this particular cohort. And as we move forward and we identify each particular cohort, this is we're going to have certain characteristics. So, if you fall in these particular generations, doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have each one of these particular characteristics, but it does, however, give you some kind of foundation, if you will. So let's talk about the traditionalists, born between the year 1900 and 1945. A strong moral authority, grew up during the Depression, um, satisfied with delayed reward. Even though they experienced very hard times growing up, it was followed by times of prosperity. They adhere to rules. They are responsible and stable. Now, is every single person who falls in this generation? No, but I think I just want to make it clear as I move on to the others that we don't want to tie ourselves down to the generalization, but we want to be able to identify some of those characteristics based on the life course perspective that has a strong impact for the students, and we'll identify some of those that impact and those challenges later as we move along in the presentation. Let's take a quick look at the as we look at the baby boomers born between 1946 and 1964. We want to identify that not only do we have students that fall in this age group, but we have faculty that fall in this age group as well. So we want to pay attention not only to the learning needs of the student in this category, and also the diversity of individuals born during any of these time frames that I'm mentioning, but also faculty and how that impacts them as instructors in the classroom as well. So individuals were uh, directly or indirectly impacted, very much a part of the Vietnam War, civil rights, highest divorce rate during this cohort, post-war babies, American dream promised to them as children, and they pursue it and continue to do so. At times, one characteristic seen is they were greedy and ambitious, optimistic, um, strongly influenced by equal rights and civil rights, of course, personal growth, and wanting to make a difference, and strongly team oriented. So let's just take a second here. So when you think about these students in your classroom and this age group, you can think about how they would. Let's just take team oriented for example, and that characteristics that is very much a part of who they are. Now, does this mean everyone's a team player? It doesn't. But this is obviously a characteristic that you can place for the student and use that to their advantage in the classroom as well. Generation X. Now, these are students born between 1965 and 1980. Not just students, but individuals born between this time. Grew up during Watergate. First generation of latchkey kids. Their moms worked. They took care of themselves. They were the first generation to not do as well financially as their parents did. Highly educated, high job expectations, um, some lack of organizational loyalty, and the beginning of what we began to see of techno literacy. And this, of course, reflects itself and aligns itself later as we begin to talk about some of these challenges that we'll face for this particular generation. Now, if you look at some of these characteristics, you can start to think about how you can take these characteristics and align them in course development, align them in managing students and handling students. Does that mean that we need to know every age group of every particular student? I don't think it does, but it's also part of challenging ourselves to be not only aware of other diverse issues, but that this being an issue of diversity as well in the classroom, I think anything that has to do with age and our tendency to lump individuals in all elderly, all adults, all middle adults, all older adults, all adolescents, all teenagers, I think can be a problem in not being able to be sensitive to some of the diverse issues that these generations bring to the classroom. With millennials, so 1981 to 2000, of course, a lot of the students that we see now, we're starting to see a whole other generation past millennials come in, may start to come in as well. But this is a generation that, in the future, I mean, so digital media, grew up with digital media. They kept busy as kids. First generation of children, most children who had schedules. And this is important because I thought about this when I um, developed this slide, and I thought, one thing I think about is that by the time these students get into college, I'm sure they're very tired of having schedules, and in some regard, maybe even do everything they can to not be a part of a schedule and not adhering to schedules. So, something else I kind of keep in mind in working with students. Highly tolerant. They're the most educated generation. They're a generation of now, which we're going to spend probably the last part of this presentation talking about this now generation and what that means for us and the challenges we face in the classroom with now. And then street smarts, which is to some advantage for them culturally and as they move geographically throughout uh, the United States, it can have a positive. A few things that we know about today's students, preaching to the choir here, but I want to mention the millennials we know are about instant messaging. I only identified one category within each of these groups because I think it's important to identify all of the things I just mentioned, but to choose one and how it can be a challenge in the classroom. If the millennials are into instant messaging, which means that their expectations of when we respond to them will also be as such. Now, does that mean that expectation has to be fulfilled? I think we know the answer to that. The Generation Xers have strong customer service expectations. This is very different, and most articles that you read and most research that you'll see, you'll find that this is something that comes up, especially when employing Generation Xers in the workplace. You'll find that this is something that is different than other generations. The expectations are higher. And then baby boomers, kind of more of a life issues, I guess, that comes about for them is that they're taking care of children and maybe parents who are ailing in some form or fashion through Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia or other illnesses or chronic illnesses. So they're balancing both of these, which we see this a lot with our students at all different age groups and just their social life skills that they are balancing a lot. They're balancing work and children and stress. But also with baby boomers, this is something that's quite common for them and something that's important to recognize within your students when considering uh, this. Now, let's move to the next slide. Um, the NCES reports that 3/4 of all undergraduates are non traditional. And again, we, just to kind of review here, they're part time students, financially dependent, meaning dependent on financial aid. Um, they have their own dependents that they're caring for, they're single parents, they have delayed enrollment. Now, this is directly reflective or paralleled to the life course perspective that I discussed. If you look at these particular students and what they have been experiencing, um, not necessarily that not only looking at the generation, but the life course perspective and how the decisions they made or didn't make, or the timing of those decisions, the opportunities, all of that is what we see here is it aligns them as non-traditional or even in some cases a traditional student. So I sometimes wonder about why they're called non-traditional students when we see so many students that carry these particular characteristics. Jason Fraun in 2003 It identified 10 attributes of an information age mindset. And these attributes really help discuss and add to some of the challenges that we face in looking at the different generations and their impact of their own cohort in the classroom. Particularly looking at information age mindset, I think he did a good job in 2003 identifying these attributes, and I still think they hold true in some cases. But I'm not going to discuss all of them. I'll discuss most of them. But let's look at the fact that computers, and Jason identifies that the computers aren't technology any longer. This made me think about the first computer that I purchased and how big it was. It was a gateway computer. I think paid almost $4,000 for it. It was just like having this space age technology in my house. It seemed like I had to devote a whole room for it, I guess, if you will. And I saw it as something very foreign. It just seemed I wasn't. Um, it was something new to me. It was being introduced to me and had already been introduced, obviously, to society. Some people already were very good at it, if you will, knew what to do. This was not the case, obviously, for me when I made this first purchase. So we can't look at computers as technology anymore. It's such a normal and everyday part of all of our lives. And a lot of technology, cell phones, now even streaming. Um, those of us who remember going to rent videos, those days are long gone. And it just didn't even seem like it was that long ago, however it was. I remember going to buying the first VHS machine, and it cost, they could cost somewhere between $600 and $800. Now, the internet is better than TV. This is the information age mindset. This is what people prefer. So obviously, it has a direct impact on these students as well. Doing is more important than knowing. This is probably a big part of the reason that I even have this up here. And there's one other attribute that he talks about that had a direct impact on me and how I started to think about students. If doing more is more important than knowing, then I can hear and see some of these students thinking to themselves, all I want to do is get discussions done, get the assignment done. I really don't care what the instructor guidance says. I really don't care about what the book says. I'm just going to answer this question and do what I'm supposed to do. It really made me just my mind blow up and start to think about how I can do things a little bit differently. And that multitasking is a way of life. Not necessarily a good way of life. Many studies now, as all of you probably know, that it is not the best way to be productive, that we're not in our best productive mode when we are multitasking. Stopping to answering an email, I think I read somewhere where it can take 8 to 9 minutes before you can even get back or focused again on what you're particularly doing. And we know that this is true of students, not only just regular constant interruptions, but an attempt to multitask. And here, the unfortunate part is that most people who multitask think they're good at it. Now, they might be good at the actual process of it, but what happens within their brains, there's a great new book that I been hearing about, called The Distracted Brain, which talks quite a bit about multitasking and has really redirected the way in which I am doing things in the office, and trying to share some of that with my students as well. So I encourage you, if you haven't read that book, to pick it up. Staying connected is essential for them, young or old. This is important, and a zero tolerance for delays. Uh, this is a challenge for all of us. If the expectation is, I text you 30 seconds ago, why haven't you responded? I sent you an instant message, why haven't you responded? This whole idea of no longer answering phones and it takes too long. Um, the if we look at it this way, the student's not only expecting there to be maybe a live person, but they're expecting it to be answered quickly. They want an answer to their question as fast as they can get it, and any time of day that they can get it. So an asteroid, I think, has done a really good job in and trying to achieve some of this for the students. We have students who are, wake up early in the morning and get their work done. We have students who are up all night long, all during the day. And it used to be that the student knew that they would have to wait till the next morning to get a hold of the professor, and now that's not necessarily the case. Lastly, and I put this on a slide by itself because I think this cut and paste world that he talks about is so important for us to start to think about in the classroom, that the creator and the owner, the consumer of information is fading. And that the assumption, if it is digital, it belongs to everyone. I don't even really know that I need to discuss that any further. But this whole assumption that if it's digital, it really just takes us back into the classroom and how students may be thinking, and how whatever's available to them at reach within the internet is theirs and belongs to them because it's there, and therefore it's free and no one needs to be given credit for. I think that speaks for itself when we're looking at developing courses or managing students so far within Turnitin, or making sure that we do everything we can that the student doesn't have this assumption. I'm not saying that there are students we don't do enough to tell the student that this is not um, does not conform to academic integrity. However, and nonetheless, this is a mindset, and I think we have to recognize it, and it's part of being able to be sensitive to a group of students who are growing up in the age of technology. Challenges that we see from all generations that I saw as I kind of combined some of these is, number one, to eliminate delays. We live in a customer service culture. The customer service is, and what we know about customer service is that it's a prerequisite to retention and effective learning, as Diane Oblinger identifies. Students will abandon studies due to a lack of timely support, perceived or real. And this is something else that I also think is important, whether it's perceived or real. And we know we face that on a daily basis with students. Their idea that someone is not communicating with them and it's their fault, that material is late or that assignments are late. Um, their expectation and that they are paying for tuition, that they are, it is expected that they are treated uh, 24/7, provided with information 24/7, quickly, and or else we'll lose them. And I think that this is also something I'm going to think about for the new year coming up, and how I can even add more to this in my classrooms in regards to not only just um, helping this, making the student believe and allow and hoping that they believe that I am there, and beyond the call of duty, I think, if you will, with obviously with some limitations and boundaries. But it is a challenge, and it is a challenge for all the generations as we move. Other common generational learning styles and challenges that we saw and preferences within this presentation was, it was important to understand and know our students as boomers and Generation Xers and Millennials and so forth. And the learner's view should represent the design of the course. Again, this is where diversity comes in, and this is sometimes I don't think we think about generational differences. We obviously know that the learning styles are multifaceted, preaching to the choir about that, but it's never hurts to repeat it. Service and the immediacy of that service, the group activity and the interactivity, all are parallel and all interact with one another. Um, but the immediacy of that service is a big part of the challenge that I think um, I got out of preparing for this presentation. Thank you so much for being here and time to listen to this presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. You see the email address there below. And have a great week and continue to enjoy the conference.